A lot of the support for the BC government stance comes from Indigenous peoples, but not all First Nations groups oppose pipelines. The CBC's Jorge Barrera joins us from Ottawa with more. So who are these groups, Jorge?
Well, Kinder Morgan has said there is about 43 Indigenous groups and communities that have signed an agreement with the company, and these agreements include something called mutual benefit agreements, or MBAs, that provide, lump sum funding that's put into a trust account, or employment, training, or contracting, things like that these agreements will guarantee the First Nations over the life of this project. Now, we actually tried to figure out which communities are on this list of 43 because some of these communities don't want to let it be known yet that they've signed on the agreement, given the sensitivity and volatility around this project. But there's 10 of them that are in Alberta and 33 in BC, and what we found, we identified about 42 of the 43, that it seems that the majority of First Nations along the corridor in BC, either the land corridor where the project is going through, the expansion is going through, or the marine corridor, appear to have signed an agreement with the company. And some of these leaders of these communities have been speaking out about it, like the chief of Whispering Pines and Chiam. They've said, this is good for our communities, it's good for the economy. Other communities have signed on because, this project's going to happen anyways, we might as well benefit from it. But some of the communities on this list of 43 say that they haven't actually made a final decision. We spoke with the chief of Lower Nicola, which is near Merritt, BC, and he said, we have a conditional agreement right now with Kinder Morgan, a conditional agreement on an MBA, and also on allowing the pipeline project to cut through its reserved lands. Now, according to Kinder Morgan's filings, they say that they have received that consent to go through Lower Nicola's reserved lands for their project, but the chief of Lower Nicola says, it's conditional. We still have to make a final decision on this. It's not a done deal yet. Now, Kinder Morgan initially had a number of 51 Indigenous communities and groups it said it had agreements with, but they reduced that number after a group of Stolo communities held a referendum and decided to reject any deals with Kinder Morgan. So it seems that this list of 43 is also a bit of a moving target.
Some Indigenous groups say that if Trans Mountain goes ahead, it could turn into a standing rock situation. And that was the U.S. showdown in Dakota over a new pipeline, and you covered Standing Rock. So what do you think?
Yes, I did cover the Standing Rock protests. I was there on a night called the Battle of Backwater Bridge, where there was tear gas and fire hoses and sub-zero temperatures. The thing about the Standing Rock protests was that it was directed at a single point. So they were trying to stop a pipeline from going underneath a body of water that was where the Standing Rock tribe was drawing its drinking water from. So it had a specific point of conflict, and they were trying to actually block the pipeline as it got closer to the lake, where the reservoir where they were going to drill underneath, which was what they thought the threat was. If something even close to that happens in BC, it will be on a much bigger scale, because we're talking about the length of a pipeline that is hundreds or 1,500 kilometers long, and there's communities all along this pipeline, and there's a lot of points where people could set up protest camps. They're building these tiny houses along the route. So we're not just talking about protests around Burnaby, we're talking about points all the way in between. And remember, the First Nations that are opposing this project also have signed an alliance with other communities across the country. So not only could you see potentially, and we're not there yet, but that is the rhetoric. Standing Rock, you could potentially see more than one type of Standing Rock situation along that route, but you also could see solidarity protests in other parts of the country. We're not quite there yet, but when people start invoking the Standing Rock, I think if that happens in BC, if we get to that level, I think it will be on a whole other scale. I mean, we've seen some of this in New Brunswick during the LC Bucktug Mi'kmaq-led protests against shale gas exploration, and what happened there, and with the Mi'kmaq, supported by the Acadians, eventually drove off that company and ended up influencing, a change in power with the New Brunswick provincial government from the Conservatives to Liberals once they agreed to a moratorium. So these movements can have a lot of impact, and you don't have to look to Standing Rock to see something similar that has happened in Canada. Just look to 2013 and Elsie Bucktug with what happened there.
Yeah, that's interesting insight, Jorge. Thank you. The CBC's Jorge Barrera, live in Ottawa.